held on the 18th of November. All happy that we signed them? Right, minus come. Upcoming. Say you usually are. About you, Nigel? No, no. No, so you mustn't. Item 2, apologies. Leave any apologies?
We have apologies. Leonard Williams.
Can we just say, obviously Henry is in hospital, for anybody who didn't know. So let's hope that he's progressing well and able to come join us again. Item 3, declarations of interest. Is there anyone declare anything this afternoon? Item 4, licensing of animal acts. Amendment to fee structure. I'll pass that over to Jenny.
Jasmine Thomas, Environmental Health and Life.
Hello, everybody. So just to give an overview of what we're proposing and the changes to the fees and variation fees. Changes to the legislation took place in 2018, which essentially brought one set of regulations in for a number of activities. And so you've got 6 activities for animal licensing, and it's all under one umbrella legislation. That sort of includes pet shops, animal boarding for both cats and dogs, hiring out of horses, but not livery, breeding of dogs, and for training of animals for exhibition. And there's separate legislation for licensing of zoos and for anybody looking to keep dangerous wild animals. So the 2018 regulations were introduced essentially to raise standards, and the requirements were a little more stringent than the former requirements, and there is statutory guidance that sets out detailed conditions that need to be met. So those standards will either be minimum standards that they have to achieve, and then higher standards and optional higher standards, which all then determine the rating and the length of the license given. And if minimum standards aren't achieved, then the license can be refused. So as a service, we operate on a full cost recovery basis, and the fee structure has been calculated into 2 parts as required by legislation. And it's generally called either Part 1 and Part 2, or Part A or Part B. So local authorities vary in the use of those terms. Part 1 covers the cost of the council handling the application, carrying out the licensing inspection, and then determining whether or not a license should be granted. So the Part 1 fee at present has to be paid when the operator applies for a license or at renewal. Part 2 fee is known as the grant fee and covers the cost of issuing the license, any ongoing enforcement, so investigation of complaints, inquiries, etc., compliance requirements such as the unannounced inspections during the term of the license, and these are called interim inspections, and any other associated costs with running the licensing regime, such as the renewal process. So we've looked at the licensing process, animal licensing process again, and consider improvements can be made for both the benefit of the operators, but also for us as a local authority. So currently, many of the operators, applicants will pay the Part 2 fee in a reasonable time frame. But there are always a handful of operators that do delay that process. And what that entails is that it delays the issuing of the license as well. So what we're proposing is a more streamlined process which would improve the service of to compliant operators, but then also prevent sort of unnecessary time delays in the process. And just as an example, for instance, only recently it took the officer over 2 months to try and get the Part 2 fee. So it just delays the process, and it just means that we're having to chase businesses to get that fee to just finish off that process. And historically, operators in the past have also paid by cheque, whereas now we're encouraging them to pay online as well. So that's our first proposal, is to combine the Part 1 and Part 2 fee so that it can be paid at the time of application. If for any reason the license isn't granted, then that Part 2 fee is more easily reimbursed. And that's probably one of the just alterations in the report. We mentioned that there were 2 businesses that hadn't been issued with a license. It's actually 4 businesses since the 2018 regulations. But it's much easier to reimburse the business, and it's a quicker process if we need to. What it does allow us to do is complete the process of issuing the license to compliant businesses much quicker. The second proposal is to introduce a variation fee. So currently we don't charge a variation fee for a business that's looking to alter their license. It might be for a pet shop that's including additional animals or increasing the numbers, or it might be the changes in ownership details, or one partner has left the business, so it needs altering. And going forward, as part of the cost recovery program, what the proposal is to charge two potential fees. One as an administration fee where it doesn't really need any further investigation, and that fee would be £25. And where it's likely that a further visit or an assessment needs to be done, then that can be at a higher cost recovery based fee of £98. So these are the 2 proposals we put forward.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. Is there anyone who wants to ask any questions? Yes. Okay, Mike.
Just a couple of quick ones. What happens when an application is refused and they don't apply again? Do we go and look to see if they're carrying on their activities outside of a permit? And the second one is probably the same. Who carries out the inspections, the routine inspections? Thank you.
So we've had 4 businesses who weren't granted the licenses. One was last year, and it was a riding establishment. We keep an eye on the business. We might look at what their social media posts are doing. We might do a drive-by. But generally, once we've issued and formally written to the business that they haven't reached the minimum standards, then generally businesses will adhere to that. The good news on that part is that that business did substantial works in the last 4 or 5 months, and only last week the week before we did the inspection, and they have achieved the minimum standards and have improved vastly. The other 3 businesses that weren't given a license have either closed and stopped operating, or they've moved outside of the area and to new premises. So the inspections are carried out by the environmental health officers. One of the things that the legislation has introduced last year is formal qualifications for officers. So we're having to go through level 3 of qualifications. So we had to be registered with to do the courses on the 1st of October last year, and those courses have to be completed by the 1st of October this year. So we've got officers who have previously done inspections, and they're allowed to do the inspections if they've got 1 year of previous experience, which those individuals have. The rest of us who didn't have a year's experience of doing inspections are now doing the qualification. So we have assignments and questions to answer and complete those assignments by the 1st of October this year. Okay.
How many licences are currently in operation? Thank you.
In the report, we sort of gave some details of the numbers, but we've essentially got 48 licences granted and 6 additional ones which are related to zoos. It's 4.18 is the details of how many for each one.
Mike asked what happened to these businesses that didn't conform, and he said a lot of them had actually moved away. Is there any way of tracking those? Because they could be setting up in another authority with low standards again, so that could be a concern.
We have had a couple of inquiries relating to some businesses that didn't achieve the minimum standards here. One business subsequently moved to a adjoining authority, and we then refer. We sometimes get complaints from inquiries from members of the public who have known about these businesses. They feel that they're still operating, but in another authority, and is that still okay for them to do? We work with the other local authority and inform them of the business so that they can actually do the investigation and respond to the complainants.
We have in Purton Techno Horse Sanctuary. It's been subject to various conditions from Wolverhampton City Council. They've suddenly moved to Dippens Lane, which is just over the border from Wolverhampton. They've set up an entertainment ring, a horse ring, etc. They're living on the premises. So are they subject to licensing? It's also under enforcement at the moment. So I'm confused when this suddenly appeared. It's about 18 months now. They got kicked out of Wolverhampton because they weren't going to be subject to various legislation. So how do we stand?
We're aware of that one. It's currently with planning enforcement because we don't want to license them if they haven't got planning permission. So it's currently under investigation by planning. Once that's sorted, we will then look into that. But essentially, as a business, the first port of call comes down to whether they've got planning permission to run that business or not.
So when I make inquiries to enforcement, all that they tell me is, oh, we've advised them to fill out a planning application. So is that the rules and regulations?
Yes, it causes a problem if we start the process of a license process when the business hasn't got planning permission in the first instance. So the planning process is really vital. And we work with the planning enforcement officers as well on this.
Right. Are you aware that are you aware that there's a caravan on site and there's a couple and a young child living there without toilet facilities?
Not aware of that. We're aware that there is a caravan site, which again, planning enforcement are looking into. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. How do you manage or monitor people that have got a stable area, but they have other horses in a field from other people? How does that work? Because I do know several people that have got horses in a field, supposedly to a particular horse place, but I wondered how you manage that.
The legislation only relates to riding establishments where they left the horses out for that activity. There are lots of livery places that exist, there are lots of livery businesses, but liveries are outside the scope of the regulations.
Just look down here and we've got 2 zoo licences. Where are these zoos? In South Staffordshire?
Yeah. So Halfpenny Green is the wild zoo at the vineyards. So they have a little area at the back which has been provided to the zoo. So that operates as a zoo, and they do falconry displays as well. So it's and the second one is Rodbaston. So then there are no elephants or lions necessarily, but there are other types of animals which are no giraffes either, but there are other animals which are deemed to be as part of a zoo.
This is just sort of a follow-on from Nigel's, because people have been concerned about the state of the horses as well, haven't they? Yes. So we just wondered how that would all try. Is that sort of an RSPCA matter, or are you involved with that as well?
So with riding establishments, when we do an inspection of a riding establishment, we have to have a qualified equine vet who also does an inspection. So they look at specific things and we look at specific things. We're aware that the vet is aware of that establishment, and RSPCA have been involved.
I will just make a comment. I actually went out with Karen last week, and we went to a kennels and a cattery, and it was quite amazing. I was quite surprised just to exactly how many rules and regulations have to be adhered to, and you know, I was very pleased to see that they were being adhered to. But it was really interesting and very, 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 you know, well worth doing, and I learned a lot from that. So it was very, thank you, Yasmin, for organising it for me. It was very interesting indeed. Thank you. Yeah, go on, Nigel.
Is there a time limit on this per establishment that you or enforcement or planning will say, cut off the point, we can't take it any further, or we're going to close it down?
We've asked planning to look into it, planning enforcement to look into it first, because we don't want to compromise any other issues there, and it's important that we don't start a licensing process until the planning side is sorted out. And planning have got that, they have to go through the due process, as you know.
So, will information be taken into account from information supplied by Wolverhampton City Council?
For the planning enforcement side, I can't say what planning enforcement do, but certainly from our side, it'll be a straightforward process of if for instance, the planning side is all sorted, then we will go through the formal licensing process, and that starts afresh. So they would have to provide all the evidence and the information that we require as part of the licensing process, and then we will also have a veterinary inspection done of the premises and the horses on site. So we'll have to wait and see the progress from planning enforcement first, and then go from that point. And I think in the meantime, as Councillor Hasseltine has mentioned, the RSPCA have been involved.
Surely after a certain period, the area in question becomes established, and that we as a council can't chuck them off.
I think we can raise that with planning enforcement to see, but I think that's a process that planning enforcement will take.
I think my only concern, as Nigel's concerned, Yasmin, is what's happening to the horses while the planning process is taking place. Because obviously, if it takes any period of time, which obviously we know the planning does, it's how these animals are being treated in that meantime, isn't it really? So surely there must be instances where the two work hand in hand because of the concerns for the animals.
It is, and that's where the RSPCA have been involved. So in terms of our remit, it's in terms of the licensing of a horse riding establishment. So in the meantime, they can't operate as a horse riding establishment. It doesn't stop them having horses on site. However, if there are any issues in relation to the welfare of the horses, then currently the RSPCA is the main organisation that would be involved.
There are other issues on that particular stretch of road, and when I say stretch of road, I don't mean maybe a couple of miles away. I mean within 100 yards vicinity with flooding, which means if there's a flood there, you can't get vehicles down Dippens Lane to access the fields. So I don't know whether that will be taken into account. Rita knows all about it.
Apologies to jump in. I was just advising the chair that it's probably inappropriate to get too involved in the details of any ongoing matters. So we could perhaps return to the report, Chair, and certainly seek an approval on that.
Thank you, everyone. Right, item 5, Food Safety Inspection Programme.
Approved, the report approved.
Oh, we have, sorry, I missed that. We have to, we have to approve the change. Is there any, are we all happy with the changes? We have to nominate and second. Yes, well, yeah, okay. And we have a second. Okay, thank you. Everyone's happy, everyone in agreement.
One of the reasons why the regulations were introduced in 2018 was in response to the puppy farm industry, to try and legislate against puppies being bought over from various countries and sold separately as pets. And so if they are specific queries, and we know that a lot of it happens and that does happen, then if there are particular issues that you have, what I would suggest is let us know and we can then look at it in detail. But generally, if it's a dog breeder, it's a dog breeder. Otherwise, the dogs can be bought from places like Pets at Home type of sites. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Item 5, our food safety inspection programme. Is that you, Jenny?
Thank you, Chair. No, it's Jasmine again.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Wearing
In the hot
red
seat.
today.
It's just an update on how things are progressing with the food programme. As you will know from previously, that because of the COVID pandemic, we literally had to, it affected our food programme in particular, and a lot of that work had to be sidelined and put to one side until businesses started trading again and when it was safer to start doing those inspections, particularly in places like care homes where we weren't, or anybody wasn't allowed to go in for unnecessary purposes. So the Food Standards Agency put together a recovery plan for a national recovery plan in order to assist local authorities in prioritising their work. So we normally have a yearly food programme of inspections which are due that particular year, and those inspections are then, we try and do those in that particular financial year. But because of the recovery plan, that has been amended, and as local authorities, we've had to look at the priorities set by the Food Standards Agency and put our programme in line with that. So one of the biggest concerns for this Food Standards Agency was new businesses or unrated businesses, which required, so we would have had businesses set up in 2020 and 2021, which we couldn't get to for a number of reasons. And so that was a priority, that by the end of March this year, that we were able to get that backlog of unrated premises inspected. So that was one of our priorities, and to date, majority of those unrated premises will have been inspected. There's a handful for various reasons, either they're not ready to trade or they decided to do refurbishment work, etc. So they haven't been available to do the inspections, but that's quite acceptable. It's nothing unusual. And then the next level of inspections that we needed to do was what we class as Category A premises, businesses, those which are the worst type, or those that require inspection within every 6 months. Those which are categorized as Category B businesses, which are yearly inspections. So any inspection that was a Category A or a B that needed to be done by the end of March this year, that was prioritized as well. And again, all of those have been done. And included in that, we've included any non-compliant or non-broadly compliant businesses, so those who achieved a 0, 1 or 2 rating in the past. Those have been brought forward, and for those to be completed by the end of March as well. So we're quite happy that majority of those, in fact, all of those businesses will be inspected by the end of next week.
Where do food banks come in to these regulations, and are they covered by any regulations, if any?
Food banks do, and they're registered as food businesses, but there's also an element that they're not necessarily a business as such, that they are providing voluntary assistance. Most food banks don't have high-risk food, so they tend to do things like tinned food or shelf-stable food. And it's a balancing act there where they're not necessarily a food business that requires that sort of element of registration. we're aware of the ones that we know of in the district, and we don't have really any concerns with those, because basically the food that comes in is distributed fairly quickly, so there's very little time for that food to be in place. They don't tend to do high-risk foods that would need refrigeration or freezer foods.
Is there a list available for councillors to see where the food banks are?
I'm aware of 2 in South Staffordshire. One is in Wombourne, the church in Wombourne, and there was during the pandemic, there was one set up in Purton, who distributed food parcels. That's right. Yeah.
Distributed in Purton area, but there are plans for the Church of Purton, not Lakeside Church, but the Church of Purton, to establish a minor food bank, which possibly would be supplemented by Kingsway and the Well.
I had a phone call only yesterday from a gentleman here in Cotswold who desperately needs food, which I'm taking today. But I just wonder, we do intend to sort of start up the food parcels again as we did during COVID. But at the moment, the community group are obviously just supporting this gentleman, but we do intend to do it again as the winter approaches and things get difficult, obviously, for people.
You know, the rules are for food parcels. You only have 3 references in a 6-month period.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Right. Any other questions, anyone? Sorry.
Would you consider a food station, a church that collects food, to go be forwarded to another central establishment as a food bank or not? Would they be subject to regulations?
I think what we try and do is that if there's somebody, and that did occur within the during the pandemic, is try and establish exactly what they're doing, so that we can give them the necessary advice as well, because we don't necessarily always look at whether it's enforcement side or whether it's they need to be registered for as under the regulations. But if we're aware of them, then that is fine. But also we're in a position then to give those individuals or that society some advice and guidance as well. And if they are things that do come under the regulations as such, then we can go down that process. And the process is fairly straightforward and not very, it wouldn't be a problem for those type of societies.
What I'm thinking of is to continue.
Item 6. Oh, sorry, V.
Can I just ask a question about the vehicles that get parked on Penkridge Market? Huge lorries selling meat, facing the sun shining on the meat, which cannot be hygienic. Do they have to have a licence as well to do this? Yeah.
So they are all registered as food businesses. So they'll either be registered with us or with other local authorities, depending on where their permanent site is. And we're aware of the Penkridge one, but what they do is they put like samples out, but they don't necessarily sell all the items from the display. And in most cases, that it just depends on the time of the year as well, but they're aware of the requirements for temperature control. I think it's also worth noting, Jenny's just sort of pointed out, which just to sort of say that there's a broadly compliant rate that we have. So for how many businesses are above the rating of 3, so 3, 4 or 5, and that we class as a broadly, the Food Standards Agency classes that as a broadly compliant rate. So we want businesses to be 3, 4, 5. And checked today, and currently our rate is now 94%, which is really good. So that's really improved. What that shows is that generally our businesses over the period of the last 2 years have actually been quite responsible and been extremely compliant. And, you know, with everything else, we always have a few small number of businesses that need a little bit of a help to move forward. But generally, it's demonstrated that we've got really good businesses who look after themselves and who are willing to make sure that they stay compliant. And all of that information regarding a specific business and what their rating is on the Food Standards Agency website. We've got links from our website to the Food Standards Agency website as well. So you can view the rating of every business that's in our district. I should say there's a proviso that there's certain businesses that are outside the scope of the rating. So if it manufacturers, etc., they're outside that scope.
Can I just ask about the lorries selling meat that are coming into South Staffordshire and then going out again the same day? Are you actively taking tip-offs from people, or do you, if you're in the area, you hear about these, will you check on them at the time, or does that fall under something else? Thank you.
So we did have the meat wagons, and that is a company that's based in Wolverhampton, and they had applied for street trading during the pandemic, and they were given street trading consents, and we had contact with those businesses throughout.
Right, thank you all for that. Item 6, the progress of the taxi licensing that's being transferred to the City of Wolverhampton Council. Have a verbal update of exactly where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That one is me. Thank you. This is just a verbal update. It's a changing picture on a daily basis at the moment, but we're continuing to make very good progress in relation to the transfer to Wolverhampton. The drivers have been given very sort of beneficial licensing arrangements with Wolverhampton. So those who were already licensed with us at the time of transfer, Wolverhampton are going to give them an additional 3 years on their licence. But in order for the drivers to get that additional 3 years, they've come to some training sessions which have been run here in the council chamber. So far those have been over 3 days, and they've done both morning sessions and afternoon sessions on each of those 3 days. And we're actually doing 2 mop-up sessions on Saturday, so for the drivers who haven't been able to get in during the week time, we're finalising those on Saturday. The drivers have had to bring in all their documentation, and they've been encouraged to register with the DBS continual update system. A lot of our drivers were just producing DBS at the time of application or renewal, whereas with Wolverhampton they will have to be on the DBS update system. And what that means is Wolverhampton run a check on that on a daily basis. So if something becomes evident on the DBS, they will know about that on the day that presents onto the DBS. They've also provided paperwork as well, so right to work checks and additional photographs have been taken. So again, it's just a sort of bit more belt and braces process to make sure that everybody who's transferring to Wolverhampton is a sort of fit and proper driver. The training sessions have included explanation with how they register for licences and renew licences on the portal system at Wolverhampton. This is a system that we don't currently have, but at Wolverhampton they will be able to register online 24 hours a day, start an application process, and also be able to track that application as well. So it might be sort of finish a shift at 10, 11 o'clock at night and think, oh, I wonder what's happening with my application. They can log on and see the process of that application there. Also, something that we're aware a few of the drivers have been a little bit anxious about. We have about 8 vehicles which are classed as exempt vehicles, and that means that they don't have to display the license plate on the vehicle or the livery on the door. We give them those special exemptions. They have to meet criteria within the policy, but the criteria is focused on that being a very high-end vehicle and also the type of work that they do. So generally that work is for sort of dignitaries, perhaps famous people, things like that. So they don't want it to be evident that it is a taxi, a private hire vehicle. As I say, we've got 8 of those, and some of the drivers were concerned that they'd be able to carry that exemption forward to Wolverhampton. And the agreement with Wolverhampton is that they will give them grandfather rights for the lifetime of that vehicle that they've got. At the moment, Wolverhampton's criteria is actually stricter than ours for the vehicles that would be allowed exemptions, but some of you might be aware things like the chairman's chauffeur, the vehicle that they use, that was one that would be a vehicle that has an exemption currently. We've done some work around the delegation of the functions. Anybody who was here on Tuesday evening for council will be aware that we ratified the urgent action decision that was made in December from the council meeting in December, and there's also a report going to Cabinet next week just for confirmation on the executive functions, which Cabinet have the authority to delegate those functions. So that's just making sure that everything is absolutely sort of perfect legally wise, tying everything up for the transfer. And at the moment, we're finalising the contract, which is had a lot of legal heads around the room and barrister input into it, but again, just making sure that everything's right and that hopefully if ever we were challenged, that everything's sort of safe for us and all legally correct. And we're all set to go ahead at the beginning of April. So yeah, everything's working well so far.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, thank you, Jenny. That's excellent news because I know a lot of hard work's been put into this by you and the rest of the staff and legals as well. And let's just, I'm sure it'll all be fine and it'll all go through very well. And from what you're telling us now, it seems that the drivers are it's going to be beneficial to the drivers. I know a lot of them were concerned in the first instance. but I think now hearing all the information has certainly helped us to understand it more and realise, you know, that we are helping the drivers as well. So thank you for that. Nigel?
Currently, we have a buzz lane between the great metropolis of Wolverhampton and the last known centre of the universe called Purton. Most taxis in Wolverhampton are allowed to use buzz lanes. Taxis aren't allowed to use this buzz lane. Will that cause problems for people coming in and out? Because at the moment there is no stoppage to stop the taxis coming in and out along with private vehicles, but from April the 1st there's an ANPR camera on it.
Thank you. To be honest, I don't know the answer to that. What I can say is that our vehicles, the ones that have been licensed with ourselves up until now, will still retain the South Staffordshire plate. It won't be a Wolverhampton plate, it will be a South Staffordshire plate, and the same for the drivers, it is a South Staffordshire badge. They're still sort of classed as ours, but Wolverhampton are looking after the administration of it.
So that's answered the question. What happens if there are any South Staffordshire District registered taxi drivers? Will we, as the licensing people, still be notified as a matter of courtesy?
In respect of anything in particular, just that they new applications or renewals, or if there is an issue or a complaint?
As in the previous two cases where we've had subcommittees.
So the arrangement at the moment, this is in the detail of the contract which is just being finalised, but the proposal at the moment is that anything that would go, the policy, our policy will mirror Wolverhampton's. Anything in the policy that isn't an officer decision or the officer doesn't feel able to make the decision on, that would have gone to Wolverhampton's licensing subcommittee will be referred to our subcommittee for our drivers and vehicles.
I think one of the most pleasing aspects of us going under Wolverhampton's umbrella is the safeguarding issue, because I think we were a bit lax on that before, but they've got really stringent regulations, and it works both ways, doesn't it? It protects the taxi drivers and the people that they're carrying, so I think that's a real advantage.
Can I just have to say that the training that's been done here, we've had one of our officers here as well for each of the training sessions, and I sat in on Monday evening, and the safeguarding training was very, very good. There were lots of videos, there was lots of examples. It was a really interactive session and very eye-opening. It was a very good session.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think that's, you know, we're all happy with the results of that, and the sooner we move forward, the better for all of us now, I think, certainly the taxi drivers. Thank you all very much indeed for coming this afternoon. Close the meeting. Don't know when the next meeting is. When's the next meeting? We haven't got a date. I'm sure we'll all be